Hello, first grade poets. So today I want to talk to you about poetry craft moves. If you remember in our writing, we talk about craft moves all the time. Those are special little things we can do to help our reader understand even better what we're trying to tell them. So I want to show you 5 poetry craft moves. These are things that you can do in your poems to make them even more poetic and more like poetry. I will go through each of them and I'm going to give you an example of each of them. And the example doc is still going to be linked in today's lesson so you can see how first graders just like you have done this. So our first poetry craft move is to repeat things. Yesterday, I did that with my sunshine poem, but I wanted to show you how a first grader did that. In poetry, you can repeat words, you can repeat phrases, you can repeat as much as you want, just like this. In this poem, it's called Bubbles. Bubbles fly, bubbles fall, bubbles pop, no more bubbles. Notice how many times the author chooses to write the word bubbles. That is a poetry craft move, repeating yourself. The second poetry craft move I want to talk to you about today is called line breaks. If you notice in some of these poems, and like the poem I was writing yesterday, I just chose to put a line break in or a blank line and start a new part of my poem. You can do this whenever it makes sense in your poems. So you can start new little paragraphs or stanzas, as we call them in poetry. I'm going to show you how a first grader did it. This first grader uses repetition and also uses line breaks. Grandma, who is the one who gives you candy? Grandma. Notice this line break right here. Who is the one who cares? Grandma. Who is the one who pinches your cheek? Grandma. Notice how this person who's writing the poetry puts these line breaks in. It really helps with the poem. They also use repetition. The third poetry craft move that we're going to talk about today is shape. You can make your writing have a fun shape to it that makes sense for your poem. This poet who wrote the Martin Luther King poem that we talked about yesterday, look at how this poem has one of the lines is just the word and they put it right in the middle instead of making it start right here. You can use the shape of your lines to make your poem even more crafty. So you don't have to just write line after line after line. That's the fun thing about poetry. This one is one of my favorite poetry craft moves. The fourth poetry craft move I want to show you today is missing punctuation. Have you noticed in some of these poems that some of them don't even have any periods, any exclamation marks, or anything at the end of their sentences? In poetry, you don't have to have punctuation at the end. You can, like in the grandma poem, when they were asking questions, there was a question mark. But I want to show you this poem that has no punctuation. And it is a beautiful poem. Look at this. I'm not going to read the whole thing to save us time today, but notice how the only punctuation is one little comma right there. And that is okay. In poetry, you don't need punctuation. So it's up to you to decide if you're going to have punctuation or not in your poem. Kind of cool, right? And the last poetry craft move I want to show you today, and I think you've probably noticed, is that poems have titles. And your title really is just for your reader to know what the topic of your poem is. And you can make it crafty with different letters, different colors, things like that. Like take a look at this panda poem that we read. Look at this title. This title is really cool and creative, and it helps you know what the poem is going to be about. All right, poets, here are 5 craft moves for you to try out in your poems today and for the rest of poetry writing for the rest of your life. Have fun.